Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. You know, it's quite fascinating when you're a child and you're kind of learning how to speak, little things that you pick up along the way that you want to talk like an adult, but you can't quite seem to get there. I had that kind of problem when I was little. I used to love to play with little toy soldiers. You know, the little green ones that came in the big box, and you had 100 of them. Had a bazooka guy and a guy low crawling and a guy with a bayonet. I love my G.I. Joes. And I was fascinated with weapons. It was during Vietnam, of course, and you'd see it on television all the time. And my dad was a Marine. And I loved machine guns, or at least the thought of it. But I never could quite pronounce it. And for years and years, you would use the term machine-em a gun. I got past it. But you know, some of us never get past it, do we? And you know, when you're a child, you spake as a child. But at some point in time, you got to put away childish things. But some of us never quite get there. Today we're going to talk about a fellow who's got convictions in multiple states and is now under investigation for an absolutely horrific homicide. And the reason I mentioned vocalization of certain things, he put in an interesting Google search word. He said, Stabby. Now, I've come across a lot of sharp force injuries. I've never used the term Stabby. Today, we're going to talk about it a little bit. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. And Dave, I got to tell you, I've spent a long time sitting in front of a camera on air. I've had to talk to students that don't take notes and don't pay attention. And every now and then I'll come away with a stabby pain in my head from a severe headache. I've used the term stabbing pain, but stabby.
I misread it. What Darron Lee searched, I misread it as shabby. And I thought, that's an odd word, to use. It's something that our generation might use. It's actually a little older than that. And so I thought he was searching for shabby, not stabby. It was even worse when I realized it was stabby. Who we're talking about is Darron Lee. And by the way, Joe, when you mentioned I spake as a child, you and I both liked the movie North Dallas 40.
Yes,
and you remember the guy who was kind of playing the Tom Landry type coach. He's always on the computer, and he looks at Nick Nolte's character, and he says, the Apostle Paul said, I spake as a child and put away childish things. He was telling him, you got to grow up. You got to, it cracks me up, that you and I both like North Dallas 40.
Love
and
movie.
That today we're talking about Darron Lee, who, if you're a football player, and Joseph Scott Morgan is, okay, one day, Joe, you're going to have to share some football glory stories, because tell you what, man, football players have a special place, it's a team sport. It requires getting along with one another. And to be honest with you, if you've ever watched a player come out of college and you thought, wow, he got drafted in the top 20, he's got a lot going for him, but somehow he doesn't click, it's because he doesn't fit in for some reason or another. And I will tell you, men know how other men are. And oftentimes we shy away from those men who are not all together real men. Darron Lee, in my estimation, Joe, he ain't a real man. He's a guy who came out of college, drafted number 20 overall. There were 19 people picked before this guy in 2016. He came out of the Ohio State as a linebacker, and the New York Jets drafted him in the first round. That's guaranteed millions, baby, And yet, 5 years later, he's out of the league. 5 years later, he's got trouble. And here we are 10 years later, and he's in jail, charged with the murder, the first-degree murder, and possible death penalty case, Joe, of his girlfriend, 29-year-old Gabriella Pepetuo, 29 years old. It happened in Tennessee back in February when a 911 call was made by Darron Lee. He said, hey, My girlfriend is unresponsive. I don't know what to do. When cops showed up, they said, well, what happened? She's laying in the living room, Joe. There's blood everywhere. And Darron Lee, the former first-round pick of the New York Jets, looks police in the eye and says, you know, she has narcolepsy. I think she might have fallen down in the shower. And that's what caused all these injuries. He said that with a straight face, Joe.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll put it to you this way. With injuries over multiple surfaces of her body, if she's got narcolepsy and she was driving a car, might buy it. All right.
Right.
If she fell out of a tree and hit every single branch on the way down, might buy it. But if you fall in the shower, and I've worked cases with people that have fallen in showers, the elderly, that sort of thing, that can't get out.
Have you ever slipped in the shower, Joe?
Who, me?
Yeah.
No, I'm so graceful in the shower, Dave. Slick surfaces covered with suds. No, I have fallen multiple times, and yeah, it ain't fun. But I know that when I do fall, I have a single impact area, okay, or a focal area. You might fall. You just got to think about it, because it's very dynamic, obviously. And I was making light of it, but
yeah,
when you're in a wet, soapy environment like that, you can slip. The most terrifying part about that is that moment when you realize you're slipping, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like being on ice.
You can't stop.
And you're slipping and you don't know where you're going to impact. Most of us, interestingly enough, did you know, I don't know if it's part of our lizard brain or whatever it is. Did you know that when we do fall like this and it goes into that kind of primitive survival thing, many of us will kind of contract when we fall. Do you know that? No. Yeah, many of us will, unless you're infirmed in some way, our natural thing is to start to contract. Now, you might not make it all the way there, but it is in order to pull down like this and take the impact. Now, some of us just, all splayed out, particularly if both feet fall out, come out from beneath you and you fall back. You might strike your back. You might strike the back of your head or an elbow. But if you've got, and I really need our friends to follow me on this. Mm-hmm. If you've got multiple injuries over multiple planes of the body, it's highly improbable that you would sustain, at least what they're saying here, Dave, all of these injuries from a single event. We hear this so many times in cases of abuse involving little ones, because my question always is, and here's the classic. Yeah, he just had a problem. He fell down the staircase, and allow me to retort. Okay, straight out of Pulp Fiction there. Well, allow me to retort. How many times did they fall down the staircase? Because the injuries I'm seeing ain't consistent with that. The age of the contusions that you have ain't consistent with that. And how does it, and why do all of these marks look different? Because they all have different characteristics to them that separate them out, Dave.
Well, to get understanding where we are on this is that Darron Lee has called police. He tells them she fell in the shower, and yet she's not just unresponsive, Joe. She's dead. She is dead in the living room. And I've got to read the list, and I apologize for this, but I don't want to mess it up. Okay. Again, I said already that police described this as finding blood in every room. That's for starters. What Gabriella Pepetuo died from, multiple blunt force injuries. Autopsy findings listed 12 different injuries, including multiple hematomas, bone fractures, and stab wounds. And here we go. She had a broken neck. Severe brain trauma, bruising across her body, a large bite mark on her shoulder, a large bite mark on her thigh, significant facial trauma. There was blood in every room, including the staircases, handrails. There was blood on the walls, blood on the floors, blood in the hallway, blood on the stairs. And you know what, Joe? As they were searching and looking, it looked like some things had been cleaned up. So they went out to the garage, and they searched a car that was registered to both Darron Lee and Gabriella Pepetuo. You know what they found? They had to break out the BlueStar. Blood. It had been cleaned up, but it showed under BlueStar. You'll have to explain what that is. But as you get the idea here, this was something that took place in every room in the house. It had gone on for some time. It didn't happen from a fall asleep and fall in the shower.
I got to tell you, you really gave me pause there for a second, because you mentioned something we don't talk a lot about on body bags. And that's because when we did talk about it, we talk about it being discredited, and that's bite marks.
Mm-hmm.
Dave, you said that she had what they're diagnosing as a bite mark on the shoulder, and was there another one?
Thigh,
as well?
on her thigh, yeah.
On her thigh.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite striking.
I did get the stab wounds to her legs. Did I forget that?
I'm not sure.
She had multiple stab wounds to her legs, Joe, just to make sure that they're not confused with bite marks.
Yeah, and that could potentially be, that's plausible for that to happen. Because first off, let's go back to the anatomy of the teeth, right?
Right.
There's a reason we have these teeth up top and on the bottom, right in the leading edge, and they're called incisors. Well, what does that sound like? Well, it sounds like incised wound. Okay, and so what's fascinating about an incisor impression that is left behind by human teeth, if it is done in such a manner, and biting is a very dynamic thing, because it's not just the person doing the biting, it's the person that's struggling against the bite itself. So if you get bit on the shoulder and you're trying to turn away like this, that can change the nature of that bite mark itself. This is one of the reasons bite mark has been discredited, because it's so dynamic. It's really difficult to apply a number to it to trace it back to an individual. Now, you can qualify it, and people need to understand that. You can do a qualification on it and say, well, this looks like a bite mark, but can you definitively say that that is in fact a bite mark? Well, most courts, bite mark evidence doesn't hold up anymore, because you cannot quantify it. So when you think about an incised injury, and you talked about cuts, and we've done an entire episode on sharp force injuries. When you think about cuts, we've got stabs, and we've got slices, and we've got punctures. Okay. So with a bite mark on the shoulder or the inner thigh, and here's something interesting. I've seen bite marks on the inner thighs of legs, and invariably they're always associated with sexual assault or sexual domination. And there is a paraphilia out there, which is a type of sexual behavior that involves biting. And it has to do with literally terrorizing somebody by biting them and holding on to them. Okay, where they're struggling against this. Now, I don't know if that's the case here.
Yeah.
But shoulders are one thing. I could envision an assailant grabbing someone from behind and biting them on the shoulder, again, like a child would, and holding on to them very, very tightly and inflicting incredible wound. I mean, how many of you guys out there, all of our friends, did any of you guys go to kindergarten with a kid? There was always the kid that bit other kids, and they never would do anything about it. Little Jimmy's a biter. Get little Jimmy out of the class. He's biting my kid. My child went to school with a kid that bit him. But it's a very infantile thing to do. It's almost very primal, right? You think of, well, who bites? Well, dogs bite, right? Dogs bite. That resistance, they're holding on to something. But at the higher level with humans, there's a strong sexual connotation with biting. One of the most famous biters out there, Ted Bundy.
Bundy.
That's what put him in the Who Scout. That's what eventually put him in the chair down in Florida, Dave.
I will tell you, if you ever really want to take a look at bite mark evidence, look at that, not just for what happened at Chi Omega House with Ted Bundy, but look at what Bundy did while he was in jail. It's more what Bundy did to his own teeth while awaiting trial means more than the fact that they know it was him that bit into the victims. They didn't need to prove that part to convict him. I mean, there was plenty of other evidence, but that was part of it. Joe, as we move through this story, a couple other things that do come up, and by now you understand, guys, that we're now talking about a violent struggle that took place over a period of time. It wasn't fast. It wasn't in a hurry. There were other things in the house that police saw. And again, I'm picturing Darron Lee telling police, I think she has narcolepsy bad enough that she fell in the shower and ended up like this. Meanwhile, they're looking around this house and they're moving boxes because they were moving in, Joe. So there's already boxes everywhere, but there was a shattered microwave oven, glass all over the place. There was a violent struggle that moved from room to room in that house as Gabriella tried to save her life, tried to get away from the man who allegedly killed her. It goes down in one of those horror stories that we hear, adding in the bite marks, Joe. I think that it was part of the terrorism that went on with her.
I'd have to agree. And if we are to believe what we have been told, we're talking about an individual, and let's just think of it in terms of football. The sole purpose of a linebacker's existence is to attack and destroy. How much more so when an 18th round draft pick in the NFL draft attacks a defenseless woman, allegedly. There was a book that was written many years ago, and it's actually involving a case from my old office down in New Orleans, the Jefferson Parish Coroner's Office. Quite famous case. As a matter of fact, it's famous in the sense that Henry Lee got involved in it. And I knew Henry, and he made frequent trips to New Orleans. But the name of the book is called Blood Will Tell. And we'll have to do an episode on this, Brother Dave, remind me, but it centers around two guys that went to work on one another inside of their own house with aluminum softball bats and beat each other all day long. In the interim, the mother of the child in the house died. The child had brain damage, and the mother, of course, was the wife of one of the assailants in the house. They even stopped to eat cereal in the middle of the day as they were beating each other with bats. And the thing that I learned from that case in particular, and this is when I was a very young investigator, is what does blood deposition tell us about movement and the dynamics of blood deposition? And it was really brought to bear when Dr. Lee talked about that case extensively. And you could, if you've ever wanted to try to understand things like cast off and passive dripping and all these sorts of things, because you're talking about bats that are being used, you're not talking about a firearm, and then people that are bleeding and they're moving around. It's incredibly frenetic. And here in this case, Dave, according to what we're hearing, is that we have a subject that the victim is being maybe chased about the house or drug about the house. Either way, we've got a lot of movement, and it sounds like we've got a lot of bleeding.
Well, and that's the part that I think was boy, I hope y'all understand when I say something's fascinating or interesting, it's not to demean what took place. In reality, Joe, as we talk about these, it's fascinating how somebody like Darron Lee, a college-educated man, a man who spent a few years in the NFL, would still think like a child that, that she fell down and got all these injuries, when the facts, the evidence sitting in front of you, it looks like a slaughter has taken place. Yeah. And I need somehow to understand what we're going to learn, Joe, because as I mentioned now, we've got broken glass in the house. We've got the shattered microwave oven, which indicates, I'm thinking, he picked it up and allegedly threw it at her. I'm guessing, because in a fight, you're just doing everything out of just a manic craze. But hey, let me share something with you before we go too much further. All right. Darron Lee, just so you know, he didn't wake up on the wrong side of the bed allegedly that day. Darron Lee, 9 months before this day. Do you know what Gabriella Pepetuo did 9 months before the day that she was killed? 9 months before the day. 9 months before her death, Gabriella Pepetuo paid Darron Lee's remaining court costs tied to his Ohio conviction on attempted assault and a domestic violence issue. That was one that he was on probation for. She paid the fine for him. Still had a case going on in Florida, which, by the way, Darron Lee was not allowed to leave the state of Florida. So by leaving the state of Florida and moving with Gabriella to Tennessee, he was in violation of his probation, and his probation would have been revoked and he would have been put in jail all before she died. So there are going to be a number of lawsuits that come out of this, I guarantee you. But actually, allegedly, now I guess we have to say that because this has not been adjudicated. At this point, Darron Lee is just accused of this heinous murder. Gabriella Pepetuo is 29 years old and she is dead, but he is only accused of her murder. He is in jail. Prosecution has not decided if it's going to be a death penalty case, but it is death penalty eligible, Joe. And Darron Lee, 10 years after he's drafted into the NFL in the first round, is sitting in a county jail awaiting his next day in court. There was blood in every room of this house, Joe. It showed a struggle that had gone on for a long time. As the investigator, can you walk into this scene looking at the injuries of the victim and the evidence that you see all around and match up the blood, the spatter, the blood, the broken glass, the walls, the floor, the ceiling? Can you match that up to the injuries on the victim's body?
You cannot definitively say that the blood that you see deposited right here actually originated from a specific site. Now, you can hold forth an opinion about it, right? And that's what experts do. We offer up opinions, and it's up to the jury as to whether or not to accept them. And, you're challenged in court by the defense or the prosecution, depending upon who the expert is. However, there are certain injuries that you can look at and say there's a higher likelihood, for instance, that the blood deposition right here that I have, and all of us have probably heard about arterial spray. If you're caught in an artery, if you're caught in an artery, say with a stab wound to the throat, when that is removed, the knife you have this spurting that's coming out. So if someone's standing adjacent to the wall, you can see a spurt pattern that comes onto the wall. And sometimes it has kind of an arcing appearance to it. The droplets many times might be finer than, say, for instance, if you've got an event that comes off of a bat striking somebody in the head. Okay, the droplets of blood might be larger. And again, a lot of this is dependent upon velocity, and that's how we classify. We actually classify 3 main categories of blood deposition by velocity. Low velocity, medium, and high. High almost exclusively goes to firearms. You've got individuals that are being struck with a projectile flying through space. Many of them are supersonic rounds. They're striking an individual, and of course you get that kind of fine misting that comes about as a result of that. Now, you can have that same injury from a gunshot wound, and it's no longer that dynamic first impact. Now you've kind of got this oozing blood that's coming out, or it's free falling and dripping. You think about, say, for instance, a medium velocity strike, which is something that you might get with a fist. You can certainly get it with a baseball bat or a hammer. You're kind of using a lever to strike this individual, transferring a lot of energy onto this, but not as much as you would see with a firearm. And then, you get low velocity, which many times comes about certainly as a punch or maybe a kick to the face. You're not generating as much injury, but the deposition of blood is going to look completely different. Now, you can look at the injuries on the body and you can see points where the skin has literally been torn, either through a laceration or through a cut. We talked about incised injuries. Mm-hmm. And you can kind of hypothesize the origins of this. The other thing is that if somebody is popped in the nose or the mouth, think about Nancy Guthrie right here, where we're talking about free-falling, kind of gravitationally dependent blood drop that's falling away, say with a bloody nose or bleeding lip. That's going to kind of passively fall, and you'll kind of get these perfect They're not necessarily perfectly circular, but they'll be closer to it than something that kind of has an elliptical shape to it. So
Wow.
you interpret this blood around the house. Now, I think the most telling bit to this is that, let's say someone is attacked. I'll just give you an example.
Yeah.
On a second floor of a home, that's where the attack starts. And they have been punched, pummeled, stabbed, kicked. We're not going to say shot in this case because there's no indication of firearm play. But all of those injuries coming to bear. Well, what's really important here is you can see where the initial point of attack is. But what? Let's just say, for instance, what about the victim trying to escape, right? And they're on the second floor. Well, she's grabbing a handrail, right? She's got blood deposited on her hand. Well, that contact on that rail is going to look different than, say, if she was struck in the nose and that blood was kind of cast off of a fist or off of a hammer or something. She might lean against the wall. That's a transfer, okay, where we'll have transfer onto the wall because she's kind of rattled. You can actually see where somebody is like crawling. I've seen this, and they lean into the wall, and you might have these very concise areas where, just imagine she's crawling down the stairs, and you've got these little depositions that are coming here, and she's got blood in her hair. She's leaning. You can actually see the form of the hair. It looks like a bloody mop has been dragged across the wall or across the floor. Now, is she doing this under her own power, or is she being actually dragged along the way, with bloody deposition into her hair, and then she's deposited in a specific area where she is left to bleed out? The fact, Dave, I think that's really impactful here is something you've said a couple of times. The police are actually saying every room. Now, how do you get blood if you've got two people? How do you get blood in every room of the house? I don't understand that unless somebody is making an effort, perhaps, to go behind themselves and clean up in these environments. Maybe they're searching for towels and they're going into the bathroom and they're pulling towels off the shelf and you've got blood on the wall. Maybe they grabbed the doorknob to the bathroom and made a contact there, or they're leaning against the wall while they're thinking about what to do next. They're at the kitchen sink and they pull open the cabinets, and now they've contacted the cabinet doors beneath the sink, or maybe they lean on the sink and they're thinking about it. Maybe they turn the knob on the spigot at the sink. Does it necessarily mean that there was an attack in every single space in that house? Not necessarily, but you have to consider every bit of it, Dave.
And, Joe, with this particular case where we have Darron Lee and his girlfriend, Gabriella, obviously to me, and I know that this could be wrong, but based on what we know, she didn't fall in the shower, as he claims. But we do have enough evidence now because, when you go through the legal process, you go to court and you do have an opportunity for bail, and if you want bail, you have to present your reasons, why you won't fly. But the prosecution also gets to talk to the judge about what they have and whether or not, you should be allowed out. And of course, whether it's going to be bound over for trial. I mean, these things are all preliminary issues that have to take place. And it's because of the preliminary things, from binding it over for trial, deciding about will we let him out before trial. We got a lot of information, Joe. And the information that we got included that before calling the police, Darron Lee used ChatGPT like a defense lawyer. Joe, he got on the computer and used an AI bot to give him answers to the problem he was seeing. And can I share one of these things that he asked for an answer?
I would love to hear it. I can't wait to see where this goes with AI.
He asked questions, and in the questions, he gave commentary, okay? Like, what do I do if? And it's almost like he knows somebody else is going to see this, right? Yeah. This is what he wrote. Among the messages that prosecutors said that Lee sent to ChatGPT: don't know what to do right now. Fiance did her crazy thing again, and now she's messed up. I wake up and she has 2 swollen eyes. I didn't do anything. Self-inflicted. She stabbed herself. Slit her eye? IDK, I don't know, but she isn't waking up or responding. What do I do? Early in this, you talked about, I spake as a child. Does this sound like an adult, mature human being asking a question? Or does it sound like the most messed up thing you've ever heard in your life?
No, I don't think he's spending time in philosophy class at the Ohio State University trying to understand communications here. No, I don't. He didn't take the logic class that they offer in the philosophy department. No, it wouldn't seem to me, at least, because this is absolutely absurd. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dave. Is this where the term "stabby" comes up in
here we go.
this search?
Yeah, I was going to walk you into that one. A couple other things that he came up with. One of the questions was concerning the physical signs of injury, of slip and fall in a bathroom or shower, apparently relating to whether injuries could be explained as accidental, which is exactly what he ended up trying to do, okay? Prosecutors also allege that he asked whether bruising around both eyes and what were described as, quote, 2 stabby-looking wounds could result from a fall. He's saying she has 2 wounds on her body that look like stab wounds, but they're only stabby-looking. Could they have happened from a fall in the shower? He's asking a computer, an AI bot, is it possible? Is it legit? Like, could I if this is what the next generation of people thinks, Joe, for real, if this is the rationale, I fear for tomorrow.
Well, yeah, and I got to tell you, it's certainly going to give us more breadcrumbs of information, isn't it? We're going to be able to figure things out a lot easier, because anybody that would go and speak to a bot to come up with an explanation for these extensive injuries, the black eyes in particular.
Self-inflicted.
Yeah, that could be particularly self-inflicted. I just cannot imagine in what universe an individual would think that this is wise. I mean, we're surrounded by this technology all the time. There are so many stories out there now about how people can be tracked down by the things that they say, they seek out, those things that are demonstrable in an electronic sense. I can tell you this, the electronics in this case, combined with these injuries that she has sustained, are going to be very, very difficult to simply explain away at trial. Holy smokes, Brother Dave. I got to tell you, many cases that you and I cover on body bags, we're having these discussions and we're thinking, gee whiz, yeah, this is really awful. We've got several injuries. Dave, we don't have just, I think saying several injuries is an understatement. This is a laundry list of things. And Dave, there are a number of these injuries right here that in and of themselves would be fatal. She's got multiple fatal injuries here, Brother Dave.
I think the part about this that really bothers me, and I'm hoping that you can shed some light on it, okay, is that we got 12 different injuries, including the multiple hematomas and the bone fractures, but we know that her face took a lot of beating, and we know that she has a skull fracture. What happens to a person when they've got that going on in their skull, when they've got all these other injuries too? I mean, and just like this constant pummeling, I cannot imagine, that a human can put up with a whole lot. It just seems too severe.
Yeah, it really does. And this is somebody, whoever the assailant is in this case, somebody that is really on the attack here. You know how we had previously spoken about the black eyes, and I'm saying that plural, when you're getting into this chat GPT thing and asking questions and all of this. Most of the time, when we think about bilateral blackened eyes. Some people refer to them as raccoon eyes.
Mhm.
You'll see this as, and when people have had like some kind of rhinoplasty, nose surgery, that sort of thing, because these bones in the face, and we have to understand the facial bones are part of the skull. Some people try to disconnect those two. They're not. They're very intimately connected. These bones are very, very thin in here. So lots of times when you have bilateral black eyes, okay, through here, uh, we're thinking a basilar skull fracture. And that means like at the floor of the skull, you'll have a fracture line that runs through it. Well, what does that mean, Morgan? Why are you saying that relative to black eyes? Because that blood actually seeps in to the suborbital areas right here. And you'll get kind of the swollen eyes. If you've ever seen, many times you'll see these boxers. You're seeing a boxer that's been just absolutely just pummeled and their eyes are swollen up. Well, you've got fractures of the facial bones. You've also got like nasal fractures where they've been popped in the nose and these sorts of things. And in extreme cases, you can actually have fracturing in the floor of the skull. This takes, Dave, I cannot express to you how much force this takes. And most of the time, you're not going to achieve these kind of fractures by a single blow. Okay,
Right.
unless you're like in a car accident.
Mhm.
What this tells me is that there is a high probability that we're talking about somebody just absolutely pounding on the face over and over. And it would not be too far of a reach to say that a foot might be involved or a knee to the head or the facial structures. That certainly happened along the way. And these bones are very, very fragile that are in here. We think that they're very resilient. I'm sure many of you, our friends out there, have had a fractured nose. This lovely thing that I sport, I've had multiple fractured nose in football and, well, fights, so we won't get into that. But I have had my nose fractured on several occasions. And very, very painful. And yes, both times I came away with bilateral blackened eyes. You get into that, and then they're able to, at autopsy, make this diagnosis of severe brain trauma. Well, what does that look like? Well, brain trauma, this is kind of, we look for hemorrhage in the brain. So some of the levels that we're talking about, we have like epidural. The brain is actually enclosed in a sac called the dura. If you've ever seen a placenta, a placenta and a dura sac doesn't look all that different, but the brain kind of floats in the sac, and it's awash with cerebral spinal fluid. All right, and it acts kind of like a shock absorber. Can you imagine just having your brain sitting inside of a skull and it's not cushioned in any way? Well, that dura sac actually cushions the brain. Okay, and so you have epidural, which means that there is hemorrhage between the skull, the internal table of the skull, and the actual dura, which separates the surface of the brain from the skull. Then you can have subdural hematoma, which means it's in between the dura and the surface of the brain. Okay. And then you can have subarachnoid, which means subarachnoid below the surface of the brain, indwelling in the brain. So those are three, and there's multiple other kinds of injuries, but and a lot of this arises out of blunt force trauma, severity of blunt force trauma. And when they're talking about brain damage, there are going to be focal areas, probably massive areas of her brain that have this indwelling or overlapping hemorrhage in there. You're going to have destruction and compromise of the brain's ability to function. And it's a death sentence, Dave. It's an absolute death sentence. You have a lot of hematomas all over her. Those are going to be specific areas where she has been struck. And Dave, I got to tell you, I was really surprised by this because this is something you don't normally see in an alleged domestic attack where you've got a subject that is found and they've got injuries all over the rest of her body. You see it in a movie. You don't normally see it. Doesn't she have a broken neck?
That was one of the first things that caught my attention. Broken neck, along with all of the other injuries, Joe. And I'm thinking, could that have happened in the process of a beating that, because boy, it just doesn't sound right. But you know what I'm after. Is it possible that that was the neck breaking was incidental, that it wasn't intentional, that he didn't, the suspect broke her neck during the course of the beating, or would it have to be specific? Would they have to go after
Well, I
the
think
neck?
it's an interesting dynamic, and that's one of the reasons I mentioned kind of these causal factors that are factoring in. You know how I talked about stomping and the
Yeah.
knee?
Right.
So it does, in fact, take a lot of force to snap a neck. Okay. I think, people, they'll see movies and whatnot, and they'll see somebody walk up behind somebody and, break their neck like that. And yeah, that's possible. But most of the time, when you have broken necks, that comes about as a result of literally very specific blunt force trauma. You get it a lot in car accidents. Okay. You can get it a lot in falls from height. So how do you replicate that, kind of the energy transfer that you have with a fall from height or a car or a motor vehicle accident? Well, I think that it's possible that you can land a knee on the back of somebody's neck. Let's say they're laying in a prone position, face down. They're already, kind of in a greatly diminished state because they've had the hell beat out of them. They've got stab wounds or cuts. And then you have somebody that just, like, they're in a wrestling rink or something, one of the WWE or something, and they just kind of launch with a knee into the back of the neck with that amount of force and transferring down. That would, in fact, snap the neck. You could also probably do it with an elbow. You could certainly stomp on somebody on the back of their neck and break the neck. I'll be very interested when we get the autopsy report to try to understand where any indwelling hemorrhage is, because with a broken neck, you're going to have associated the soft tissue around there. You will actually have hemorrhage into that with a broken neck, but also the vessels that run through the spine. You've got these tiny little, what are called foramen, that run through all the vertebral bodies. Foramen is a fancy word for a hole. It's where the vessels, and if a neck is broken, you can actually see these kind of hemorrhage points along the way if the vessel's compromised inside those bony structures in the neck. The level of violence here, Dave, this is so rage-filled. When you think about what this poor lady was subjected to, not to mention bites. They're saying 2, right? We're talking about the shoulder and the thigh.
Right.
I'm almost certain that in a case like this, they will have done a rape kit. And most assaults on women, if I'm the investigator, I'm going to strongly recommend a rape kit, because I want to know. It can give you a lot of, even if they're in an intimate relationship, it can give you insight into those moments before death. If there was some kind of intimate contact at that moment in time, or was this act started during the midst of intimate contact? Because you want to try to paint this picture out, right? And if you don't capture it at autopsy, you'll never get it. So I would imagine they probably did a rape kit on her as well, Dave.
All right. Now, the one thing that we led off with early on, Joe, was talking about how there was blood in every room, including a vehicle that was registered to both of them.
Yeah.
The investigators found cleaning products in bags in the house. So there was a belief that there was a pretty significant cleanup effort that was attempted, but it was just too gone. There was too much there to clean up. But, and again, I go back to, remember, the initial call to 911 is my girlfriend, my fiance, is unresponsive. She's laying on the floor. She's unresponsive. And yet, I don't know how long she had been there when he called, Joe, but it was long enough to get cleaning supplies and to try to clean up the blood. Cleaned it up enough that when they got to the car, investigators trying to follow the different trails, I guess they saw a sign of blood, but they didn't immediately see it with the naked eye. So what do you do when you think you have something? What do you do, Joe?
Well, most of the time, I think everybody's default position, and it's the term that we hear the most, they'll say, did you luminol the scene?
Right.
Luminol is a first-generation reactant that we have used over the years. And, I remember being back in the day where you used to have to make it up, literally make this stuff up.
You had to make the luminol?
Yeah, you had to
It
make
didn't like come in a spray can?
No.
Really?
No, it didn't.
I assumed it came in a thing that went to the SWAT room and there it is. Get the luminol. Let's go. And I
No,
also,
not
by
back
the
in the
way,
day. It wasn't. You had to
something
actually
else that you
make
told me
it.
was you have to do it real quick too.
Yeah, you do.
It
And
doesn't stay.
it's very, very unstable. And that's why many people have changed over to BlueStar now. And
Okay.
BlueStar works on the same principle. It's going to, what happens is that the BlueStar actually interacts with the iron that's contained within hemoglobin, okay, which is a component of blood. Remember, blood is not a standalone substance, okay. So it's got multiple components to it. Red blood cells, white blood cells. You got serum. All
Gotta
this
be
sort of
honest,
stuff.
Joe.
And
I swear I should have paid more attention to biology in high school because I know I've heard all this before. It's just
well, it's a refresher. It's okay.
yeah.
But yeah, so BlueStar is actually more stable than
Okay.
Luminol. The cool thing about it, it's actually more sensitive than Luminol. Okay, so let's just say if somebody goes through and they apply cleaning agents to a specific area, Luminol might not get the same, it won't have the same level of sensitivity as BlueStar will when you're trying to get the hit. Now, you still have to apply it and try to visualize it in low light conditions. Here's the other thing that's the upside with BlueStar. It's got a longer lasting glow.
Okay.
I remember with Luminol, you had to really be careful about your shutter speed because you want it open. And as soon as the lights go off, boom, you have to capture it and snap it out like that, really, really quick if you want to catch the luminescence. BlueStar lasts a bit longer. It's high. It has a higher level of sensitivity. It's certainly safer to use, and it's more stable than Luminol too. So that's the benefit of it. And if you go through a residence like this, and I don't really know at this time how many applications they did. I would imagine that if they found what they thought was blood, and Dave, it can be the tiniest little speck that they might see on the door jamb of, not the door jamb, but the side
Right.
of the interior wall of the door, the handle might be a little bit on the dashboard. That's an indication that maybe they cleaned up. And what's really wild is when you go to a scene and somebody is actually cleaned up, and you have these massive kind of swipes and wipes on the surface where you can tell they've run a rag over the area and you can't see it with the unaided eye, and you apply this luminescence to it and it's like pop like that. It just like strikes you. I mean, it's like one of the most striking things you'll see. You'll see this kind of really intense glow. It almost looks like I don't know, like a Prussian blue, it's just really striking, very visible like this, and you'll see it all over the place. And when you snap that and you have that in your images and you can take that to court and you can have somebody that understands the technology, can explain to the jury what they're looking at, and this stuff might be everywhere. Can you imagine how powerful this is in court? I mean, it's one thing to see blood, but if you can demonstrate the movement of blood as a result of somebody trying to clean it up and the deposition of where it was, all the more it's so impactful to a jury when they see this, because not only do you have deposition of blood or evidence that blood was deposited there, then you go to another level and you have an expert say, yeah, somebody tried to clean this up. Well, automatically the jury is kind of like catching side eye over at the defendant sitting at the table. This is going to be very powerful stuff in this case, Dave.
And that is where we're headed next. It has not been adjudicated. As we mentioned, Darron Lee, former first-round draft pick in 2016 of the New York Jets, a linebacker out of The Ohio State, is accused. He is in jail awaiting trial now. He has not been granted bond, so he will be held until trial. He is on probation from Florida and Ohio and on previous domestic violence issues. He is in jail. He's not going to be let out. And it could be, Joe, a death penalty case, but it is going to come down to what police saw and some of the evidence you've heard about on this show. I think the Chat GPT is what's really going to get a lot of attention, but the reality is what will convict him isn't what he asked the computer. It's going to be the forensics.
Yeah, I think that it will be, brother. And what's going to be fascinating for me to watch is the level of violence in these other cases that he was involved in other states. Particularly interesting to me is, will any of that evidence be allowed at his trial? Okay. Because, if let's just say that this was a world where he had the chance of bailing out, of bonding out. Okay. They would look at his previous history in those circumstances and say, this guy's got a violent history, man. As a matter of fact, his name's supposed to be up here. He's supposed to be down in Florida. That was a condition of him being in the system down there. And oh, by the by, you've got this other violent case up in Ohio. Will they allow any of that stuff to come into court? I don't know. That's going to be for the lawyers to figure out, and whether or not the judge will allow it. But I do know this. There are people out there right now, my friends, that are struggling with domestic violence all over the country. You don't hear about them. You really don't, because so many people are terrified. They're terrified of what their alleged assailant can do to them. I don't think that this case is a one-off. I think that we've probably got a history of things here. And just like many people have histories, keep that in mind. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bag.